Good evening, and welcome to the historic Lanphier Livery and the Conservancy's beautiful gathering space, the Chaplain B. Barnes Reading Room. My name is Barbara Axmacher, and I am the Executive Director here at the Conservancy. Before we begin tonight's special presentation, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge our 2024 community programming sponsors. This year, 17 generous businesses and families agreed to sponsor our work, with their support helping to defray the costs of our reading room public programming, general educational programming, as well as the care and maintenance of this meeting space. Please join me in thanking these sponsors. Additionally, I would also like to acknowledge the efforts of our staff, Daniel Cole, Becky Wilson, and Tommy Papadia. Their assistance is critical to success of tonight's presentation. Finally, I invite you to join us on August 5th at 6 p.m. right here in the reading room for our Lanphier Live presentation of Wargaming in Newport since 1887. A History of Wargaming and the Navy, with Professor John S. Logel of the U.S. Naval War College in Newport. And now, please welcome Conservancy President and Chief Science Advisor, Dr. Peter August.
Barbara, thank you. I had to queue up our speaker's talk here. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for showing up on this beautiful summer evening. Actually, that little breeze feels pretty good, doesn't it? I'll pull the plug on the orange fan here to quiet things down a bit, but let's eke out the last few minutes of moving air. It's my distinct pleasure tonight to introduce our speaker, Dean Brenner. Dean is an expert in communications. I think we're going to see that right away. He is the president and CEO of the Latimer Group in Connecticut, a firm specializing in persuasive communication strategies and skills coaching. His roster of trainees consists of over 10,000 executives, business leaders, and technical experts from around the globe. He is the author of 3 books on persuasive communication and team building. He has an MBA from Olin School of Business, a master's degree from the University of Warwick in England, and an undergraduate degree from Georgetown University. Dean is also a competitive sailboat racer. He was a member of the U.S. national sailing team and the chairman and team leader for our Olympic teams from 2004 to 2012. Please join me in welcoming Dean Brenner.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter. Next time I'm having a bad day, can you read that back to me again? Good to see everybody. Some friendly faces, some new faces. Really excited for tonight's conversation. We're going to talk about some real issues tonight. We're going to talk about the world that we're living in. We're going to talk about communication. I'm going to paint a picture for you of a world that I don't think will surprise you, that it's a world we're all living in. But I'm going to paint a picture for you. We're going to talk about the implications of this really noisy world that we're living in. We're going to talk about it from a few different angles. And then we're going to have an open discussion about what we do about it. And at that point, we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A and idea sharing, because ultimately, I think the most valuable part of any conversation around issues or problems is the what are we going to do about it part of the conversation. Okay? Now, don't wait for me to prompt you for questions. If there's something that I say that doesn't make sense or that doesn't line up with your worldview, that's okay. We're all big boys and girls. I can handle it. So fire away. It's all fair game tonight. So communication is my life. 23 years ago, my wonderful wife Emily and I made the decision to start an executive coaching and training firm. It was actually her idea. If you'd told me at the time that I'd still be doing this 23 years later, I don't think I would have taken that bet. But we've now built a consulting firm that serves Fortune 100 and 200 companies all across the globe, and we do all sorts of training and coaching. And there's been a number of unexpected implications of this choice for my life's work. Obviously, communication is a focus of what I do. But when you spend a lot of time teaching and coaching communication, and when you spend a lot of time doing that with really successful, really intelligent people inside big organizations, not only do you become a student of communication, you also become a student of human behavior. And it's amazing in all of the coaching that I do how often the conversations become not just about their professional lives, that's what they hire us for, but the conversations end up bleeding into personal issues too. And I think the lines between our professional and our personal lives have always been a little blurry. I think they became extremely blurry a few years ago, and we're going to talk about some of the impacts of COVID, but I think the lines were obliterated at that point that has had some real implications that I think we are only just now beginning to understand the impact of that. Okay? So let's dive in here. So I want to come at this issue of this noisy world that we're living in through three lenses. And I'm doing this intentionally because I want to make this interesting and applicable for everybody in the room. And for some of you, the personal implications of this noisy world might be most interesting. Maybe you've got young kids or grandkids. For some of you, you might still be neck deep in the professional world and you're seeing some of this yourselves. And then don't worry, I'm not going to make this political, but I am going to talk about the political environment and how all of this is connected. Because I think the best way to have real solutions around problems is to understand all of the pieces of the problem first before you can begin actually solving the problem. So it will not get political, but we are going to talk about the political environment. Okay, so let's first talk about reality. And I'm just going to give you some very simple data here. I don't think it will surprise you, but some of it is a little bit startling. So let's first talk about the personal realities of this noisy world that we're living in. And I've got some really simple data here broken out by age group. I'll read it to you because it might be hard to read from the back. But this is the average amount of time spent online broken out by age group. 16 to 24-year-olds, and this is all reliable data. Like this isn't, I didn't get this off a meme on Facebook. Okay, this is real stuff. 7 hours and 19 minutes a day, average 16 to 24-year-olds. But we're not just limited to the young people. If you go all the way up to, yes, my demographic, 55 to 64, we're spending over 5 hours a day online. And just thinking about my own experience, I think there's a lot of days where that number is a lot higher than that. So reality, undeniable reality, we are spending an enormous amount of time online with some real world implications. Now let's talk about the realities of our professional world. And a lot of this data is Latimer driven because we coach thousands upon thousands of people. We teach 300 or 400 workshops a year. I'm coaching at any given time 8 to 10 executives. So we're getting a front row seat to what's actually happening inside large organizations. And by the way, it's true for small ones too. I think the experiences are universal. And some of this is COVID driven. But the average amount of time that people are spending communicating, and the largest driver of that data is meetings, is about 80% of our time, professional time, is spent in meetings, okay? With information coming at us, if you add in the amount of email that the average professional has to deal with, the number of text messages or chat messages that they have open at any point of their workday, every single person that the Latimer Group interacts with on some level is complaining about very toxic levels of cognitive overwhelm. Okay, this is not just a small thing. Every single person that I coach and train, when I say what are the biggest problems for you, that comes up first or second literally in every single conversation. The amount of information that people have to absorb, that they're expected to absorb as part of their professional lives, right? And then let's talk about the reality too. And there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot to unpack. But the reality of digital devices and social media is that there's been a huge democratization of information, which essentially makes everybody a publisher. And a lot of you are nodding when I say that. I think it's obvious to anybody who spends any time online, but the implications of that are massive. They're absolutely massive. And it leads to this noisy world because we no longer go to Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather for our source of truth. They're now coming at us many times a day from all angles. And that leads to a reality where there's significant percentage of people that list political polarization as a real issue. And again, that's just part of this noisy, distracted world that we're living in. The reality is we're spending a lot of time online. There's a significant amount of overwhelm felt by the vast majority of people at work, and there's so much political opinion and information coming at us online that all of those things, and others, I'm cherry picking here, but all of those things collaborate to create, for many, many people, a sense of real overwhelm. How do I deal with this? Now, if you also add on top of that the realities of what COVID did to us with forced isolation, okay? And we're spending less time, even still to this day, we're spending less time in the office together. There was a long period of time where we weren't spending much time together socially. As I said earlier, and I'll say it again, I think we're just now starting to scratch the surface of what that has all meant. Okay? So you have the combination of a society where we're forced to not be together, forced isolation, and we're dealing with an overwhelming amount of information and digital distraction coming at us every single day. Bad combination. All right? We in the right room? We having the right conversation here? Does this feel relevant to people? Yeah. Anybody not living in this world? Yeah. This is very much my world too. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what does this all translate into. So again, we're gonna break it into personal, professional, political to try and hit it from all angles. So let's talk about it from a personal standpoint. I don't have a specific study to give you, but it wouldn't be hard. There's about 18,000 of them that talk about the impact on mental health and the negative impacts of extended periods of time online and dealing with social media. There's all sorts of family studies that talk about the impact of everybody being on their device and the drop in conversation and the drop in family time. There's a lot of study going on here. It's real. And there's also rising studies that talk about the impact on not only mental health but physical health on the forced isolation of the last several years. These are real things. This is the happy, fun talk, okay? Let's talk about the impact of this reality in the workplace. I think one of the really interesting impacts of the rise in remote work, and by the way, let me just riff on this for a minute, because I don't know a single company, and we work with a lot of them, that feel like they have figured out how we go back to work. Literally every company I know is struggling to get this right. And by the way, here's a tip. If the leadership thinks they got it right, the employees are pissed. And if the employees think they got it right, leadership is pissed. There's an either-or component to this. But one of the things that's been really interesting about the rise in remote work, yes, it's really convenient, but it means that you are literally, it's basically poured gasoline on these problems, because now instead of me sitting around a conference table with you in a meeting where I might still be able to multitask on you, but it's kind of hard to do unless I just don't care about appearing rude. If I'm in a remote meeting with you, it's actually quite easy. And the vast majority of people in their office, in their home offices, will have multiple screens. I have 4. And the average number of fields of information that most professionals have open at any given time of their workday is between 8 and 10. So multiple tabs on the browser, email, multiple chats, news sites, lots of information available. The other thing that has been a really interesting impact of remote work and the professional on the professional world is when we all went remote, we stopped commuting. And there's a really interesting impact from that. Now, I'm not advocating for really long, annoying commutes, but some sort of modest commute actually has a positive benefit that we never used to think about. Where in my commute home, it gave me a little bit of time to shed my workday, recenter on my home life, so that when I walked through the door, I was present, and vice versa in the morning. If you're working from home, the commute from the guest room to the family room isn't really long enough to shed that. And it also has led to an almost forced compulsion for people for their workdays to be extended. All right? 79% of the people that we speak to say they do not understand where the boundaries are between their home and their work lives anymore, and they're all checking email outside of work hours constantly. The other thing that's happening in the professional world is because we're not together as much as we used to be, we are trying to recreate that with more meetings. Okay, I don't see you in the hallways, I don't see you at the coffee machine, so let's meet. And what that means is there's fewer and fewer break times during the workday for the typical professional, which means for many people their experience is scheduled back to back to back to back to back to back all day long, which means there's no gaps during their workday to get any work done, which means they probably are doing it on their personal time. All right? And then the information overload thing, there's all sorts of studies that talk about the amount of data that's, I don't even know how big a quintillion is, but I know it's a lot. And there's enormous amounts of data being produced every day, and the scary part is we don't know how much of it is actually real or true, because everybody's a publisher. And there's something else that I want to talk about here when it comes to implication, because when we're not spending as much time together, one of the things that's happened with our social media usage is it becomes a place where we go to find connection. Okay? So we go to social media to connect with our friends if we don't see our friends as much as we used to. And that's all fine. I do that too. And by the way, I have social media accounts. All right? But if that also becomes the place where I source my news, and it's not just the place where I connect with my friends, now we start to see these problems becoming much more toxic. All right? So the point here is that overwhelming amounts of information, overwhelming usage of digital devices, and forced isolation over the last few years has created a real sense of cognitive overload and separation. And that is something that has been really surprising to me over the last few years, how often it comes up in conversation. All right? Especially, the blending of the professional world and the personal world never ceases to amaze me how blurry that is now. I used to talk in my professional life, I'd speak to people about professional issues. In my personal life, I'd speak to people about personal issues. Now, in both parts of my life, I hear people talking about both at the same time. So what I want to get to here is I would love to get to a conversation around how we deal with this. This is how important you all are to me. I brought notes. So what I want to do, I wrote down some things that I think about when it comes to solving this. I wanted to spend most of the time here. I wanted to very quickly paint the reality picture and the implication picture, and then spend most of the time talking about what do we do about it. Peter mentioned that I have a background in Olympic sports, and one of the things we always used to say to our athletes is, if you don't manage the environment around you, your environment's going to manage you. So whenever it comes to a conversation around, wow, this world is really noisy, this world is really distracted, no one's listening to me in my meetings, my kids can't put their devices down, I can't talk to anybody about anything newsworthy or political anymore. Everybody wants to talk about the reality. I think the more valuable conversation is to talk about solution and what do we do about it. So I'm going to share some thoughts here And then I would love to very quickly pivot into which ones are resonating for you, which things have you seen that are working or not working. You can take the conversation wherever you want to go. The word that I use a lot in my work when it comes to problem solving and when it comes to being a really good communicator, the word that I use a lot is to be intentional, right? The way that you communicate better, the way that you connect with other people better, the way that you deal with realities like this is to be very intentional in your behaviors. So on the personal side, here are some things that Emily and I have researched and that we have seen some benefit from. We will have digital detox days in our family. And we also put hours around it with our kids. Now, we have younger kids. Our kids are 14 and 9. Having guardrails for your kids is important. I think it's just as important that mom and dad follow the rules, which is in our house, often harder than it is in getting the kids to follow the rules. But they're gonna follow their lead. So we will very intentionally put guardrails around when devices are allowed and when they're not. We also are very intentional about blocking certain sites, certain types of sites that they can get access to and which ones they can't. We put very specific guardrails around that. And we also, don't ask me how to do this, because my son does this for us, but on all the devices you can actually set up alerts that will tell you how much time you're spending online every day, and alarms can go off when you go over a certain amount. I know that you can do it because he set it up on my phone, and it buzzes every once in a while when I go over the limits. The other thing that we did with our elder son when he got his phone, and this has actually been a huge home run, is we actually created a contract, a behavior contract, of how we expect him to behave when online and what the ground rules are. And this includes things like mom and dad always get to know what your password is. Mom and dad, even though we almost never do this, mom and dad get to look at your device whenever we choose. I think that's probably the biggest driver of behavior than anything else. But we talk very openly with our kids about what we expect their online usage to be and what we expect their online behavior to be. And when we think they're getting out of bounds, we talk about it. And then I think the biggest thing when we're talking about younger people is to model the right behaviors. And if you want your kids to learn how to put down the devices, I think you have to show them that you know how to put down the devices. If you want your kids to be better listeners, you have to show them what good listening looks like. And this is really hard, and it takes a lot of practice. Even though I might know what that looks like, it is hard to live it every single day. So we will very intentionally work on the way we listen to our kids, the body language that we give them, giving them the eye contact, giving them the verbal and the physical reaction that I'm hearing you, to show them what that kind of connection and presence looks like. Let me just pause on that. How many of you have seen anything work really, really well when it comes to managing this noisy, distracted world in our personal lives? What sort of strategies have you seen, or are any of these resonating for you? Or, yeah, Krista?
I would say the requirement that people meet in person and interact in person to the extent the environment permits. For me, that's number one.
Say more about that, Chris. Say more about, like, what do you mean to the extent the environment permits? What does that actually mean?
I would say that if you let people know that their personal reaction,
Yeah,
including facial, physical, chemical,
sure,
is more important to you than what they commit to text
sure,
or show on the screen.
yeah,
If you urge it in that direction, you're going to be communicating less, but rather more.
yes,
You'll
I
have
got you.
fewer interactions, and they'll actually have a bit more contact.
I love it. I love it.
Can you summarize the comment? We can't hear in the back.
I'm sorry, I don't have a speaking voice. May I stand?
Yeah, you can, of course you can stand.
I
I'm not
simply-
going to do it justice.
I
So.
simply said, in a meeting or in contact with people, I make it very, very apparent, very obvious that I would like a personal, in-person, verbal, facial, chemistry and body language interaction with people to get something back. And I never require a yes or no or a polar decision. I try to tell them, I want your reaction, and it can be conflicted, You can have that most penalized phrase in the English language today, I don't know.
Right.
And it can, by not being a penal
Yeah.
situation,
Yeah.
and by being highly personal, you have fewer of them, but they have greater depth.
Yeah. What I just heard you say is you make it okay to disagree,
Or to not know.
or to not know, or to have a different opinion. We're going to come back to that one. I'm going to hit that one later. I saw a hand up here.
One of the most helpful things for me has been to look at it from the...
I'll repeat. Now that I know, I'll repeat this one.
Okay, I'll stand up. So one of the most helpful things for me has been to really look at the whole subject in a very big lens,
Yes.
wide-angle lens. And so 5 hours online a day,
Yes.
times 365 days a year,
Yes.
that's over 1,800 hours of your life. And if you calculate the number, you make the assumption that you maybe sleep 8 or 9 hours, so
Sure.
you only have like 15 hours,
Yeah.
say, of waking life.
Sure.
That's 4 months of your year.
Yes.
Of your waking life. And
Yes.
that's just for 5 hours. And,
Yeah.
the chart showed that people are much higher. So for me, that made me realize, well, I have a choice. I can choose to be around people, around nature,
Sure.
being creative. And so that's what's been most.
Yeah, and what's interesting about what you're saying, though, is I think we all have choices in our own behavior, but then we also all contribute to the culture within our families, for example, of extending those behaviors. And I think for a lot of people, that's the hard part, is how do I get the group to behave in a different way? There was another hand that I saw. Yeah, Julia.
Just to say one thing, which is that Paul and I have 2 kids who are 9 and 12, and
Yeah.
we've been battling devices, for years, and we haven't succumbed. But our daughter is turning 12 tomorrow, and she's been desperate for a phone and desperate for a phone. We've really been, we had planned months ago that the birthday gift would be a phone.
Yeah, we did. Zachary got his phone at 12.
So we talked.
13, sorry.
So we spoke to a
She
good
knows.
friend of ours who's a social worker in a school, and she said, it's fine that you're getting a phone, but don't make it a gift. It is a digital tool
Yes.
that belongs to your family's
Yes.
digital arsenal, and you need to make sure that it is not something that it's not hers, it's not a reward. It's
Right.
just a tool that's a part of so it was so
I love that.
And we already told her, and we've already started talking about the ground rules that every device goes in a drawer at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Take your device into your bedroom. And I think that it was just so helpful because it's so daunting for parents when you're on the brink of it to just realize
Yeah,
you could lose your kid to this.
Totally.
stupid piece of-
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'm not going to do Julia's total justice, but the point was when you get to the point where your young children are about to get a phone, the way you frame that phone is a really important impact on how it gets used. If it's a gift, if it's yours to do as you please, guess what? They will do as they please. If you make it a family tool, if you make it something that's got parameters around it, not only with usage, but time, it's a different conversation. I think, is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. In the back.
I'm a parent of a 17 and 15-year-old.
Yes.
And during the course of the pandemic, we quickly switched from a posture of demonizing social media to having to embrace it because without it, my kids didn't have any friends at all.
Yes.
And so there was kind of a black and white mentality during the pandemic and immediately following. Recently, we've been struggling with screen time at home, and they're home from school this summer in particular, and being more empathetic to the battle that they're facing in
Totally.
terms of moving away from the addiction has been helpful.
Yes.
Because we talk openly as a family about how hard it is as an almost 50-year-old person to step away from the phone and the scrolling and everything else.
Yes.
It's not offering a solution. Oops.
No, it's okay. We're just adjusting
okay.
the sound here.
It's not
Okay.
offering a solution, but it's been helpful as a family to make it a little more of a gray area and share with them how it's so addictive that even us as mature adults are
Yes.
having a hard time stepping away from it.
I love what you're saying there, and what I heard that jumped out at me is not going to demonize the behavior, okay? And there's a way to regulate it and put guardrails around it without demonizing it. And if you demonize it in a way, you make it maybe more attractive. So, and it's funny, one of the other things that we do, because, you use your phone, I use our phone to turn the alarm on and off, to check the heat, to communicate with the babysitter. When mom and dad are on the phone, it's not like we're just checking social media. One of the things we do is we talk to our kids about what we're doing. You know, I've heard you say 1,000 times, I'm on my phone, I'm putting together my shopping list so I know what to get. So the kids understand that just because I'm on my phone doesn't mean I'm breaking the rules that we have set for them. And what I'm hearing there is just make it a really healthy conversation. And you also introduced a new word into the conversation that I hadn't brought up yet, addiction. And let's call it for what it is. There's all sorts of data around that. So helping anybody through any kind of addiction requires a lot of empathy. Just, you know, you demonize some other addiction, guess what? The addiction's not going away. That's a great one. I appreciate that. Ted.
Just really quickly for folks who are 50, absolutely. Where when people were paying X an hour to get a response from me, even if my response was, I don't know, I'll get back to you on Thursday, I'm now in a place in life where can I think about making less noise? If I get a message, an email, or whatever, and I think on it.
Sure.
It's not urgent that I respond immediately. And oftentimes my communication is clearer, nicer, and shorter if I wait.
I love that.
I always do it, but I think about it.
Yeah, so there's another implication that you brought up there, Ted. The proliferation of access to each other and the speed with which we can communicate with each other gives this false sense that I must respond in kind immediately. And I love that. You know, I can tell you that if I was going to list the 25 emails that I most regret sending in my life, each of them were sent quickly. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about professional here. And this one's near and dear to my heart because I lead a small organization of 16 people. And leadership in any organization has a disproportionate impact on culture. I would also argue that employees own the culture too. They don't always like to admit that because when the culture's bad, everybody likes to point uphill. But everybody within the organization has some impact on culture. But leaders have a disproportionate impact on culture. And by the way, I don't think this is totally different than talking about how parents set the tone in the home. I don't think it's that different. Not to say that business leadership is, you know, exactly the same. It's not exactly the same, but there is a lot of overlap. I have spent an enormous amount of time on this. Prior to COVID, the Latimer Group was entirely an in-office culture. And that obviously changed in March of 2020. We have not gone back. We are entirely a remote company. And by the way, that's had huge impacts for us because we now can hire from all over the country. We used to only be able to hire from Central Connecticut, which obviously limited our talent pool. I have colleagues that I see 2 to 3 hours a year in person. I have one colleague that I went 2 years without being in the same room with. And there's some pretty big choices that companies have to make, or any organization, nonprofits too, about the way they're going to build a culture in this world. Because you have to first accept the reality that if somebody's working from home, they're going to struggle with those boundaries between home and work. If somebody's working from home, it's going to be harder for them to turn it on and turn it off. By the way, in my company, we cross time zones. So if I'm on, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of my employees are on. Okay, because my employee in California, I'm an early riser, so I'm at my desk by 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning. That's usually when my brain is firing, and I'm usually firing off a ton of emails. My colleague in California isn't waking up for a few hours. And when he wakes up, if his inbox is full of stuff from the boss, you know, it creates a sense of, oh my God, I have to respond immediately. I have 4 emails from Dean. So the point here is, again, thinking about behavior changes in this world that we're living in. So there's a number of things that I've seen really forward-thinking organizations do. Be really intentional about what your expectations are and give people space to turn their work on and off. And you have to make it clear that it's okay. I have just a fundamental belief that if I burn out my employees, not only is it bad for them, it's bad for me. And it's, by the way, it's bad for our clients. Nobody wins if you burn out your employees. All right? We are very clear about communication norms, about, for example, we have a norm around when email is the primary tool and when chats are okay. We use chats within normal business hours. As soon as somebody says their workday is done, we no longer chat them. It's email only or hold the email till the next day, because there's so much more immediacy to text and chat. So we use different communication channels within work hours versus outside of work hours. One of the realities of remote work is this back-to-back meeting culture. And one thing that we did, we actually learned it from one of our clients. It was hugely popular. We no longer schedule any meetings to 30 or 60 minutes. We schedule them to 20 and 45. And that's not so that we can squeeze in more meetings. That's so that we can actually leave space during the day for somebody to breathe, fill their coffee, heaven forbid, go to the bathroom. Because if I want people to not be distracted and not be multitasking, and I don't give them space during the day to actually do their work, guess what? I've just put them in an impossible situation. So just, for those who are heavily involved in organizations or leading organizations, profit or nonprofit, think about some of the realities of your communication culture. One of the other things we do at Latimer is I've made it very clear that we will respect each other's time and we will respect our clients' time. So we prioritize, when we do have to meet, we prioritize making those meetings highly efficient, which means agendas ahead of time, which means finishing on time. When somebody ends the meeting on time, we thank each other, we acknowledge it, we call out the good behavior. When somebody ends a meeting 5 minutes early, everybody on my team expresses gratitude. Because you will do what is reinforced at work and at home. You will do what is reinforced. And then we'll talk about this a little bit, again, not getting political, but knowing, again, what I talked about here with professional is when you're setting that culture, you have to first start by recognizing the reality. Everybody's feeling a sense of distraction and cognitive overload. If you want to create a functional culture, you have to factor in those realities as you think about this culture. I think the same is true with our political conversations. I think one of the lost arts as more information, more opinion, more data, everybody's a publisher. I think one of the casualties of that world is listening skills, and specifically empathetic listening skills. Lots of people know how to be silent and let the other person make their point. Let me end the suspense. That's not listening. Just because I'm quiet to let you finish while I'm posturing what I'm going to say next, that is not the same as listening. That's silence while you wait to make your point. And I think understanding the realities, this is as far as I'm going to go on this conversation because this does get a little weird. But quite a phrase. Yeah. But understanding what the news industry has become, I think, is also an important part of this. And the news industry is no longer about news, it's about entertainment. So when you get your news from a single source, know that you are getting something that is highly curated. Nobody does more market research on their demographic than the news industry. They know exactly who they're talking to and they know exactly what they want to hear. So this healthy skepticism towards where you are getting your information is a big part of tamping down the noise of this world, okay? And understanding that just because you read it online somewhere doesn't mean that it's true, or doesn't mean that it is the entire truth. If it's coming out of the professional news industry, it's probably a partial truth, all right? And I think if we get back to the place where we can think about or recognize that there is always going to be more than one way to look at a situation and more than one way to think through a problem, I think that gets back to the kind of listening skills that will create a connection that will help us collectively navigate this really noisy world that we're living in. Let me pause on that one because I'm quite certain there's going to be comments on this topic. Yep.
I'm retired now, but I'm very active in a handful of nonprofits. I'm retired now, but
Yep.
I'm active in a handful of nonprofits that are as demanding as
Sure.
my business career was. And from the beginning, and even more so now, I didn't use the same labels you had there.
Yes.
But I felt personally I had to reconcile what you have called personal
Yes.
with professional
Yes.
and political.
Yes.
And I didn't accept the disconnect.
Yeah.
The disconnect between It was spiritual or
Sure.
moral and professional.
Yeah.
And somehow you could slide, cheat, and rob and lie
Sure.
and fraud and commit fraud and so forth, if it was all consistent with your professional mission.
Sure.
I didn't find that worked. It was like
Yeah.
the Japanese who don't say no. I'd like to challenge you.
Please.
You meet with a client
Sure.
and listen. I have aggressive listening has been part of my vocabulary with my kids for about a decade.
Aggressive listening. I like that.
I really.
I'm gonna blog about that. Can I footnote you?
I'm intuitive and I'm
Yeah.
impetuous.
Yeah.
I'm really bad.
Yeah.
And
So where's the
it's
challenge?
like that. But your challenge is,
Yes.
we have a prospective client whose name's Donald Trump.
Oh boy.
And you know him quite well.
Sure.
Because you've heard him yell.
Sure.
And you've heard him testify.
Sure.
And you've heard him write.
Sure.
Or read his writing.
Sure.
And he's come to you and says, what do I have to do to win this thing?
Okay. Are you asking me how I would coach Donald Trump? Oh, no, I won't. Yeah. Yeah.
They ought to be consistent with your personal mission.
Sure. Sure.
Of
I think.
buying or selling.
I think when we get into the world of professional politics, we've added about 18 more variables to what drives behavior.
That's nature.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I don't think Donald's calling me anytime soon, so.
Donald Trump reconciles these things.
Yeah.
He's pretty consistent across the board.
Sure.
Called borders there.
Yep. I'm gonna have to think on this one. I really don't know how to answer. Yeah.
It seems like the internet senses where your interests are and keeps feeding you the same stuff. To
That
reinforce
doesn't
it.
seem to, it does.
What I try to do is click something that I don't believe in
Sure.
in hopes that maybe
There you go.
it'll give me a more balanced.
That's a
thing.
form
But
of
I
listening.
Ask you whether there's a better strategy in order to get a more even-handed
Well-
presentation of information.
Yeah, I seek my news from the broadest possible spectrum of news sources. So for example, I think if you only read the New York Times or if you only read the Wall Street Journal, I think you're getting part of the story. I believe in reading both. And then balancing it with about 10 other different news sources. If I want to read what really happened with a political event today, I'll read about it from the Journal, the Times, AP, Reuters, maybe The Economist when it comes out at the end of the week. That to me is the only way. I mean, if I asked everybody where would you go, what single source of news would you go to for where you felt you were getting absolute truth? It's very hard, and that's why I think that the common ground, no matter what your political persuasion is that the news industry is no longer about news. It's about clicks and it's about eyeballs. So I think my solution to your idea is to read from the broadest possible sources of news before I dig in on an issue. All right? Yeah, Christopher.
There's an even more brutal way of doing triage on the conversation. I prefer to discuss things, be they political, cultural, artistic, linguistic, social, with people who read their news, not with people who watch it.
Yep.
And I live and work in a multilingual environment, so I love talking to people who also know English, Australian, German, Slavic, Chinese, other European thought. It makes it more interesting, it makes it broader, and it makes it very much more difficult to be polarized.
Yeah, and I want to just connect these dots here because when I put this together this way, I was thinking about what are the threads throughout this conversation. If you go back to think about the overwhelming amount of time that we're spending online and several of the parents that shared, hey, this is a daily battle, one of the casualties of that daily battle is less time in conversation, less time with connection, and one of the casualties there is listening skills. Connect the dot to what we're seeing in the professional world, where people are scheduled back to back to back with no time to get their work done, and in all their remote meetings, they're multitasking, which means we're not listening to each other. Then when you get to the really important conversations, no matter whether we're talking about the personal impacts of our lives or the professional impacts of our lives, we're not used to listening to each other because we haven't been doing it. Okay? I think there's a narrative thread here that connects all these different parts of our lives. Other comments? Paul?
So, Dean, this is going to be a PG-13 comment on your remarks.
A PG-13.
PG-13.
I like it.
I was listening to actually a comedian on the way home from work the other day, and he was making a point similar to what you're making, which is that we spend roughly 7 hours a day on social media.
Yeah.
And we spend roughly 30 seconds a day on intimacy with our partners.
Yeah.
And that's not, that means holding hands,
Sure.
hugging, saying hello in the morning.
Yeah.
And what, I thought that was sort of funny. And then I thought, well, think of the currency that you have with 7 hours of social media or online that you could reallocate elsewhere in a productive way.
Yeah,
For
we talked
example,
about that
doubling
somewhere.
30 seconds to 1 minute would presumably improve your relationship.
That's a good growth
right?
rate, right, Paul?
I think that, right. But I think that applies across all three areas. It's the same in professional,
sure.
same in political. For our son, who watches 1 hour of television a day, we say, okay, but then you should have 1 hour of time at your soccer rebounder a day.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And when the lady in the back, you talked about not demonizing behavior. I want to come back to that because a lot of people struggle with how do you handle challenging conversations. And I think when we, to use your verb, demonize an alternate opinion or an alternate behavior, we are contributing to the dysfunctional conversation. And one of the things I coach my clients all the time on, because at the end of the day, what Latimer Group teaches is persuasion. We teach people to drive outcomes in the workplace through more powerful communication. And what I say all the time is, human beings are animals, and no animal is open to ideas or anything when they feel they are under attack. So as soon as you tell some child that their behavior is really, really bad and they're screwing up in some way, you're putting them on the defensive. As soon as you talk about a political conversation and demonize an opposing opinion, the way the human brain works is that person goes into a defensive posture. And when we go into defensive postures, we put our figurative, sometimes our literal fists up. And we are never open to other ideas around anything when we feel we are under attack. So when I'm trying to change behavior in the workplace, I try really hard not to demonize it. I try to understand what was driving the behavior and alternate and provide alternatives. I don't want to sound like I nail every single conversation in the workplace and get them all right. I don't. But that's how I enter the conversation. We're coming up on time. Tom.
Dean, just an observation.
Yes.
My sense is that one profession and one sector that has been particularly impacted by social media
Yes.
and change in this world is that of education.
Yes.
And I know you're a parent, your wife Emily is a parent,
Yes.
and you deal with this. To me, social media
Yes.
and this world we're now living in
Yes.
has really impacted education and in many ways to the negative. I suspect there are a lot of parents in this room and a few grandparents as well.
Yes.
But how does one deal with that, and does that industry really understand what its responsibilities are to its students and to its parents?
There is no question that you're right, that there has been a significant impact in academia. And you could look at it from a variety of ways. The behavior of the student population as a unit, they're all spending all that time online and on social media, or you could look at it from the other direction and look from the leadership perspective. Whether academia understands its mission, I don't know. I don't speak for academia. But my guess is there's enough anecdotal evidence out there to suggest that perhaps not. and that maybe it's an industry that's lost its way a little bit. And I'm choosing my words carefully, but I think that the academic world has gotten a little too focused on this part of the conversation, maybe a little bit more than they should. Am I barking up the right tree?
No, but I think it's much larger than that.
Okay.
And the interaction of the education community with the parents, as well as with the
Oh, okay, I see the question. Okay, with the parents. Yeah, I mean, there is definitely, well, there's behavior issues on both sides between parents and administrators and parents. And what we have found is that it works best when parents and administrators act in partnership with each other. A lot of parents think of themselves as customers and expect schools to behave accordingly and do exactly what they want for their child. There's a lot of that going on in the academic world today. And I think there's a little bit too much of a disconnect between the parent population and the academic leader population. Yeah. Yeah. And Peter, one more question. One more question or one more comment, and then I'll make a closing comment.
You could probably write a book or a case study on my life, but from a personal and professional perspective,
Yes.
on my way down here, I have a 25-year-old son who's in physician's assistant school.
Yeah.
And I don't know about the parents in here, but boys don't call their moms or call as much as girls do. So he called me just before he came down here because he had an
Nice.
issue. So the things that I took away from your presentation were empathy, intentional listening.
Yeah.
And so I had to take that break and just listen to him because he called. He needed me. He just needed somebody to listen to him. He needed to vent. He was driving on his way home, and so it was really important. And then on the professional side, I'm in the executive world, and I'm 64, so I'm trying to plan for retirement.
Yes.
And I have a team, and the culture has changed so much
Yes.
because of COVID.
Yes.
And all of these meetings that I have my team, I require my team to come in one day a week.
Mm-hmm.
It's because, as the gentleman said earlier, it's really important, I think,
Mm-hmm.
getting together and sharing is really important,
Yes.
and to get that personal, physical, emotional interaction.
Yes.
And but it's changed because, again, I have a 25-year-old, so I remember coming in and the CEO saying you have something on your jacket, and it was formula.
Yes.
Versus I have people now that are in meetings and they have cats and babies and kids on their laps and walking across the computer
Totally.
screen. So again, you have to be really empathetic to their
Yes.
situation, and times have changed, and it's
Yeah.
a challenge culturally for leaders who have been in the business
Yes.
for a long time.
It absolutely is. And I think you have to bring empathy to the way you deal with the family issues. I think you have to bring empathy with the way you deal with the people in your organization and understand that they're probably dealing with a lot of stuff here that is a major challenge, and understanding the obliterated boundaries between these two worlds. I don't think you can be a good leader today without that kind of empathy. And then if we can get to be a little bit more empathetic and a little bit more, a little bit less dug in on our own beliefs, I think that creates behaviors that makes really important conversations like this one a little easier to navigate. So I'll end right there, Peter. Thank you for your time. Thanks, everybody.